Have you ever noticed something that just takes your breath away? Not because it's loud or dramatic, but because quietly, steadily, it makes you realize something is wrong? That's what occurred to me when I first learned about Colonel David Carter. Now, I've heard a lot of stories in my time, stories of courage, loss, loyalty. But this one stayed with me. Not just because of what happened, but because of how it happened, and how so many of us could see a piece of ourselves in it. Picture it, a crowded airport terminal, the usual hum of travel all around, rolling suitcases, boarding calls echoing overhead, families trying to keep it all together as they rush to their gates. The sort of organized chaos we've all come to know well. And then through that familiar noise walks a man in uniform, Colonel Carter, army dress blues, shining shoes, shoulders squared. The sort of stance that says he's not only a soldier, he's a man with a past. A man who's borne secrets we can't even conceive of. But today he wasn't flying for duty. He wasn't flying on leave. He was doing one of the most sacred duties a soldier can have. Flying a dead comrade home. Private First Class Jason Reynolds, 21 years old, died too soon. And that's where the story starts to turn. Because when Colonel Carter approached that airline counter with his documents in hand, he didn't demand special treatment. He didn't request recognition or applause. He requested respect. What he received was something else. So I want you to remember, perhaps to a time in your own life when you recognized something was off, but nobody else appeared to see anything. Or perhaps worse, nobody cared. That eerie silence, that internal calm before the storm, that's precisely where Carter was. Declined a flight, no explanation given, just a general policy, a procedure, a system glitch. And there he stood, a man who had served his nation with pride, a man keeping a holy vow. And yet, he felt as though he didn't fit in. What followed could have gone unnoticed, if not for the right individuals in the right location at the right time. A Marine within the crowd, a woman with her phone, some voices that chose not to remain silent. And that, my friend, is the essence of this story. Because let's face it, these moments don't come out of thin air. They connect to something deeper. They bring up questions that linger in the back of our minds. Have we lost sight of what respect looks like? Do we only pay homage to our heroes when the cameras are on? What do we do when dignity has to become viral just to be noticed? Now, I know many of you watching have lived long enough to recognize the signs. You've seen people brush off accountability. You've seen the gap between what's right and what's easy. And I know you also understand that some battles don't happen on the front lines. They happen right here, at home. This isn't a story about a soldier. It's about a system. It's about the quiet strength of everyday people who refuse to turn a blind eye. Because what occurred in that terminal ignited something no airline PR release could gloss over. It began with silence, then a whisper, then a wave. A wave that can only happen when people get on their feet and say, enough. So if you've ever felt like the world is moving too fast to care, if you've ever wondered whether anyone still values integrity, decency, or the quiet strength of doing the right thing, even when no one's looking, this story is for you. And it's not over. Because even though Colonel Carter ultimately did successfully fulfill his mission, the aftermath reveals how much farther we have to go. The headlines arrived, the apologies came, but the question persists. Why did it have to happen in the first place? What would have been the case if no one had ever said a word? That's why today we're revisiting this powerful moment, not just to reflect, but to remember, to honor, to ask the questions that matter, and maybe, just maybe, to make sure it doesn't happen again. So settle in. This is the story of Black Thread, of a soldier, a fallen brother, and a nation still learning how to show up with the respect our heroes deserve. Let's begin. A retired Army colonel, a dead soldier's body, and a flight he could not board. But then things changed and sent the entire nation reeling. It began like any other hectic day at the airport. Families struggled with rolling bags, business people were glued to their phones, and children ran ahead while exhausted parents struggled to catch up. Just another typical travel day, noisy, hectic, and traveling at full throttle. Colonel David Reshard Carter stepped in, his shining dress shoes tapping loudly on the tile floor. He'd done this 100 times before, but today was not like the others. The burden he bore wasn't merely the weight of medals and ribbons attached to his uniform. It was the somber mission in front of him. On the tarmac outside, a flag-draped coffin stood silently. Inside lay the body of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, only 21 years old, lost too early. Colonel Carter adjusted his cap and sucked in a deep, stabilizing breath. He had a job to do, one that exceeded military protocol or procedure. This was about honor, about a vow. No man left behind. Not in life and not in death. He walked over to the airline counter, setting his military orders and identification on the counter. The woman at the desk barely glanced up at first. She was typing at her computer, then stopped. Just long enough, but long enough for Carter to catch it. "Sir, could you show me that again?" she said, her tone a little strained. He handed her the forms again, his calm demeanor observing her face. He noticed it, that flash of doubt, a silent look to her coworker, a subtle adjustment in her stance. She seemed to have stepped in something she hadn't anticipated and wasn't certain how to navigate. She hunched forward and spoke something quietly to another agent. He glanced over but said nothing. The silence was thick, drawn out by the sort of hush Carter had learned to experience, but never grew accustomed to. When the woman came back, her smile was strained, fake. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's a problem with your ticket. We can't permit you to board at this time." Carter exhaled a soft breath. He'd walked through hostile zones, diplomatic red tape, and political standstill. But this was intimate. "I'm bringing in the remains of a deceased soldier," he stated matter-of-factly, nodding toward the official documents. "Everything's in order." She didn't meet his gaze. "I know, sir, but there's a security procedure, and we can't bypass it." He maintained his even tone. "Security procedure?" "Yes, sir," she replied, attempting to smile once more. "It's just policy." He didn't move, didn't budge. "Policy?" he asked back. "What policy?" The people in the line behind him had started to get agitated. They were whispering, staring, feeling something was off. It's not often you see a man in full military uniform being refused boarding on a flight. Colonel Carter didn't yell. He didn't have to. His steady demeanor spoke for itself. "Ma'am," he stated, "I have to know what the problem is. This isn't a personal vacation. It's a military mission. Everything in my papers is legitimate." She paused once more. Her gaze darted toward the back of the counter, where some other employees had stationed themselves, murmuring to each other. One of the supervisors, mid-50s, tired eyes and a name tag he half-attaché adjusted, finally emerged. He crossed his arms and shot Colonel Carter a cursory glance. "Sir, my apologies for the disruption," he started, employing that reserved, too cordial tone people resort to when they'd much rather have you just shut up. "But we do have policies in motion, and sadly we can't have them waived at the moment." There it was once again. Policies. Carter breathed slowly in through his nostrils. He'd heard this type of rhetoric before, just in other circumstances, other uniforms. "I've flown with military escorts numerous times," he said, his voice steady, his long training keeping his anger at bay. "I know the procedures, and I know there is no policy that denies me the right to board this flight. So let's drop the act. What's really going on here?" The supervisor shifted awkwardly, cleared his throat, and attempted to maintain a neutral voice. "It's just an added security precaution. Nothing personal, sir." "Nothing personal." That cut a little bit. Carter gritted his jaw, but he didn't let rage cross his face. He'd participated in enough meetings where nebulous phrases like "nothing personal" were employed to create distance, to evade truth, or worse, to silently justify something they didn't want to acknowledge. He knew the game. They were testing him, testing whether he'd lose his temper, waiting for him to get loud so that they could call the security and label him the problem. He was not going to let them have that victory. The row behind him had fallen silent, gazes fixed on the drama playing out. A woman in a red blazer leaned in and said something to her husband. A young man clutching his boarding pass creased his brow, obviously attempting to work out what was happening exactly. Then a voice broke the tension. "Sir, Are you telling me that there's a problem with his military clearance? Carter shifted position. The voice was from a man a few places back in line. He appeared to be in his mid-60s, with a sun-weathered face and a faded USMC cap pulled low over his eyes. A Marine. A fellow vet. The supervisor was flustered. No, sir. This has nothing to do with clearance. We simply must go through standard procedure. The Marine inhaled sharply through his nose. Yeah, I've gone through airport security more times than I can count, and I've never had a soldier denied escorting one of our own home. He folded his arms. So what's it really about? He folded his arms. So what's it really about? The hushed whispers in the terminal were swelling into shouts. Folks were filming on their phones. The tension that began as a whispered apprehension was now a wave, a rising tide of pressure in the air. Even the people working behind the counter sensed it. The agent who'd initially rejected Carter glanced fearfully at her manager. You could tell by looking at her eyes. Doubt was creeping in. The supervisor massaged his temple, clearly exhausted by the instant. He glanced at Carter once more, this time with slightly less assurance in his tone. Let me check something, he grumbled before hurrying away from the counter. The original agent bent her head, suddenly fascinated with her computer screen, typing as if it was the only thing keeping her in the room. But Carter didn't budge. He stood with his shoulders back, eyes steady. He was not leaving, not until this was rectified. And the terminal? It wasn't humming anymore. It was concentrated, bristling. The silent anger in the air had a focus. Individuals weren't simply waiting for their plane now. They were witnessing this moment. The Marine who had expressed himself wasn't alone in becoming annoyed. A woman wearing a denim jacket, hugging her purse firmly against her chest, shook her head slowly and leaned toward her husband. This isn't right, a woman at the front of the line whispered, shaking her head. A young man in a hoodie took out his phone, his fingers blurring across the screen. There were eyes on this now, and the airline was aware of it. That sort of attention is hazardous to any company, particularly when the cameras begin rolling. Colonel Carter maintained his calm, expressionless face, but in there, he was recording every step, every movement. The supervisor had not returned yet, and that meant that either the man was running for cover or he was waiting for things to just go away. They weren't going to, not this time. Then came a voice just behind him. Excuse me, sir. Carter turned partway. A young woman, no older than 25, stood a few feet off. She had her phone in one hand, her gaze a combination of uncertainty and quiet determination. I don't want to intrude, she said guardedly. I just need to make sure I get it right. Are they not allowing you on board? She didn't shout, but there was something in her voice, soft but purposeful, that caused the individuals around her to turn in. Carter glanced briefly at the agent behind the counter before answering. That's correct. The young woman blinked as if she couldn't quite believe it. She hesitated for just a moment, then turned her phone toward him. I'm live right now, she said softly. People need to see this. And that was it. The spark that lit the fire. A guy standing off to the side also stood up and raised his phone. This is not right, he said, shaking his head. He's actually walking out a fallen soldier? What are we doing? In the back, a woman stood up and raised her voice. Hey, excuse me, she yelled to the counter, waving. Can somebody tell me why he can't board? Several people around her just stood there looking uncertain, sitting on the edge of speaking up and unsure if they should. But the terminal was no longer silent annoyance. This was a moment. The counter agent was staring like she wished she could vanish. Her fingers had paused over the keyboard. Her gaze darted from one camera lens to the next, now directly focused on her. Then stepped forward the Marine, the old man wearing the USMC hat, and this time he was not holding back. I've lived a lot in my life, he said, his voice firm but steady with intent. But I never thought to see an American soldier, particularly one returning with a fallen brother, handled in this manner. The whole terminal felt quiet. Even the overhead announcements, the constant thrum of gate changes and last calls to board, were distant now, muffled. The only sound remaining was the soft beeping of phones logging every second. The Marine set his shoulders. This is an outrage. Behind the desk, the agent was pale. Her trembling fingers danced across her keyboard once more, as if she attempted to hide behind the screen. The supervisor was still gone. Passengers quietly murmured among themselves. A baby cried in his stroller, but rather than calming it, the mother glared down at her phone, scrolling, her expression stern with disapproval. Then off in the rear of the terminal line, someone grunted, "It's already trending." Carter didn't budge. He didn't have to. The silence from the airline attendants spoke volumes. The world was paying attention now. Cameras were out. Videos were tweeted, streamed, shared. And his story, the story, wasn't just his anymore. Then like a spark thrown on dry grass, it took off. The guy in the hoodie, still stuck to his phone, whistled softly. "Man, this is everywhere now." Carter remained immobile. He was not one to get too excited too early, but he could sense from the way the agent behind the desk suddenly stiffened. She did too. The woman in the denim jacket looked at her phone, then gasped. "Oh my God," she breathed to her husband. "It's already on Facebook." The older Marine let out a grunt and took out his phone. They don't know what kind of tempest they've stirred up. And then, just in time, the airport loudspeaker squawked to life. "Attention passengers, because of unexpected circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be late. We apologize for the inconvenience." There were some groans in the terminal, but honestly, most people weren't even paying attention. Their eyes and their phones were on something else. The uniformed soldier standing there being refused a seat on a flight he was flying to pay respects to a fallen brother. A minute later, a young woman near the windows exclaimed in shock, "He's on Twitter!" She turned her screen to the people surrounding her. Others leaned in to glance. The tweet, typed in all capital letters in bold, said, "They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. This is how we treat our heroes. Let them flee." Below it, the counts were already going up. Likes, retweets, responses. It was growing quickly. It was taking off. Another alert appeared. This one, a prominent veteran advocacy organization. "We know about the shameful incident occurring at airport name. Better for our soldiers. Action to come." There was a buzz from the crowd. You could sense it, the turning. The airline had officially lost narrative control. Whatever they had believed they were containing, it had now blown past the check-in counter. The woman across the desk, who had once spoken so authoritatively, now appeared shaken. Her breathing shook. Without a word, she turned and left, disappearing behind a frosted glass door at the rear. She wasn't going to get an answer. She was going to track down someone who knew how to manage damage. Carter shifted his hat. He'd witnessed this before. Not in airports, but in places where individuals in power suddenly realized they made the wrong decision, or the wrong foe. He was not grinning. He was not triumphant, for this moment was not about him. It was about Private First Class Jason Reynolds, the boy who lost his life and whose body still lingered out on the tarmac to be returned home. That mission was not complete. The crowd was not watching anymore. They were waiting. There was something electric in the air. Anticipation, responsibility, and then finally the supervisor came back. Only this time, he wasn't by himself. In step behind him was another man, tightly dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, his airline ID pinned smartly to his breast pocket. He walked with practiced ease, like a man accustomed to entering situations that had already gotten out of hand. He hesitated just short of the counter, his gaze sweeping over all of it. The Marine, the phones, the frigid tension in the air, and last Carter. Then he cleared his throat. "Colonel, I'm sorry for the miscommunication," he said suavely. "It appears there was a glitch in our system, but we're working now to get you on your flight as soon as possible." Miscommunication. Carter had been with the military long enough to understand what that one word actually conveyed. It meant, we got caught. What miscommunication actually signified was this: repair this, before it is more than we can afford. Carter did not respond immediately. He allowed the silence to speak, and as the seconds passed, the airline representative shifted ever so slightly under the burden of it all. "I see," Carter finally uttered, his voice steady but firm. "You're telling me this was a mistake?" "Yes, sir," the rep responded hastily. "A regrettable error. We assure you, it wasn't done on purpose." That didn't go over well. A couple of people in the crowd snickered under their breath. The Marine shook his head, unmoved. The airline rep adjusted his tie, looking decidedly uneasy. "We'd be happy to escort you personally to the gate now, Colonel. First-class treatment, naturally. First class." As if that compensated for what had just transpired. Carter didn't budge. His gaze didn't even flit toward the man in a suit. It went over him, back to the counter. The agent was still standing there, staring at anything but Carter. This was the same woman who'd handed him that tight smile as she refused his boarding. The same woman who hadn't even bothered to verify the details before denying him. He breathed slowly. "I recognize the urgency," he said, his voice steady, "but I must pose a question first." The rep nodded rapidly. "Of course." "If no one had recorded this," Carter asked softly, "if no one had said anything, would I be here now?" There was a silence, a long one. The rep swallowed. "Sir, you don't have to say," Carter interrupted him kindly, because everyone in the terminal already had the answer. Another beat of quiet passed, and then a woman in the crowd softly said, "He's right." The airline representative attempted to placate once more. "Sir, we apologize sincerely." Carter did not waver. "This isn't about an apology, it's about accountability." A gentle ripple of agreement went through the onlookers. The atmosphere had changed once more. People weren't merely upset now, they were disappointed, and the rep was aware of it. He straightened a bit, attempting to be more composed. "Colonel, let's get you on your flight." But before Carter could respond, a second voice interjected, this one younger, more imperative. "Sir?" A security officer at the airport had appeared beside the counter. He extended a phone to the airline rep, his jaw clenched. "I think you should take a look at this." The rep scowled and grabbed the phone. He scrolled. His face paled. The Marine, arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong?" "Something wrong." The rep said nothing, but they all knew. The story had leaped over the airport fences. It had gone national. A big news organization had picked it up. The headline didn't mince words. U.S. Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Airline scrambles for answers. Under the headline was a video shot right there in the terminal. The rep returned the phone, breathed unsteadily, and turned to Carter. "We profoundly regret this circumstance," and he stated. But now the voice had lost its finish. It came out raspy, strained. "We want to make a public announcement to clarify." Carter cut him off. "The public already has the truth." Silence. The rep pursed his lips, obviously out of words. Carter looked around, at the phone still rolling, at the spectators still lingering, then at the representative. "I don't require first class," he said. "I don't require special attention. I require respect, and so does the soldier I'm accompanying." Another wave of assent coursed through the terminal. The rep nodded stiffly, because at this point, that was all he could muster. "Understood, sir." The Marine grunted softly, low and approving. Carter fiddled with his hat. "Let's complete this mission." But although his responsibility was back in order, the impact on the airline was just starting. They lost control entirely. The news had broken out of the terminal and was moving faster than they could keep it back. What began as a silent standoff was now resembling a press conference. Phones remained aloft. Passengers remained glued to their seats. And then something no one anticipated occurred. A man appeared, wearing a dark blue suit. His gait, his posture, obviously not from the airline. Not airport security either. He was military. Others stepped out of his way as he walked toward them, as if sensing the energy shift. His ID badge glowed for an instant as he approached Carter and held out a firm hand. "Colonel," he said, voice crisp and direct, "I'm Major Thomas Beckett, Department of the Army. We've been made aware of the situation." Carter shook his hand. Strong grip. No small talk. He didn't have to ask how the major had gotten there so quickly. When it comes to its own, the military doesn't waste time. Beckett turned to the airline rep. "We're taking care of it now," he told him firmly. "Colonel Carter and Private First Class Reynolds' remains will not be flying commercial." The rep's eyes blinked in shock. Sir, we were just going to..." "You were just going to cover your tracks," Beckett interrupted. His tone was courteous, but the burden behind it fell heavy. Then addressing Carter once more, the major said, "The Pentagon has organized a private military transport. It awaits you at the moment." A subdued stir swept through the crowd. Individuals looked at one another. The U.S. military had taken over. Carter exhaled, not because he was being rescued, but because the mission was now on track again. He nodded slightly. "Understood, Major." Beckett cast one final look in the direction of the airline representative. "This will be taken care of." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Carter looked over at the Marine who had remained with him the whole time, silent but reliable. "Thank you, brother." The Marine nodded infinitesimally. "We look out for our own." Carter glanced back at the terminal one final time, at the individuals who had spoken out, who would not let it go, who ensured this news wasn't merely heard, but witnessed. He straightened his shoulders, smoothed his uniform, and strode, not toward the gate, but towards something greater. And as for the airline, the consequences were just starting. They had expected it to pass. A few sorries, a carefully crafted press release, perhaps a CEO statement, but the public was not letting it go. It was picked up in national news. Veterans groups denounced the event in forceful, collective statements. Politicians weighed in, demanding answers, and more crucially, accountability. Then came the worst blow, the monetary one. By the week's end, the airline's stock had plummeted. A popular hashtag demanding a boycott went viral. Customers overwhelmed their social media, calling for change, for action. Then, the ultimate blow, a lawsuit. A group of military advocacy groups sued the airline in a formal complaint of discrimination and failure to maintain protections for service members. Under scrutiny now, the CEO emerged publicly. He referred to it as a regrettable misunderstanding. He stated that the employees involved were put on administrative leave, but for too many it was too little, too late. In the meantime, Colonel Carter finished his mission. He was by Private First Class Jason Reynolds' side when the young soldier came home. He was by the family's side when they received their son, their brother, for the final time. Carter didn't do it for headlines. He didn't seek attention. He sought respect, because that above all else was really what this battle had been about. Respect doesn't have to be earned. It shouldn't require a viral video. It should be the norm. The Marine, the passengers who stood up, the individuals who decided not to remain silent, they demonstrated something strong. When there are people united, injustice can't hide. So if you're an advocate for accountability, if you're an advocate for respecting those who serve, make your voice heard. Because silence, that's what allows moments like this to occur again. And next time it may not go viral.